Today we'll be taking a look at Final Fantasy XV on the PS4 and the Potato Masher. If you don't know, the Potato Masher is a $375 PC custom built in 2014. I compare it to the PS4 to show how great PC gaming can be, even on a console budget. Let's get to it. Final Fantasy XV can be a beautiful game on a good set of hardware. More impressively, even on budget hardware, some of the more impressive aspects of the game still look great at lower settings. Particle effects, animations, creatures, and the game's lighting engine all look very similar regardless of settings. That's good because, as you'd expect, the beautiful visuals come at the cost of fairly demanding performance. The PS4 and Masher are both starting to feel a bit long in the tooth in graphical showcases like Final Fantasy XV or Kingdom Come: Deliverance. The core beauty in the game's art direction is there, but the details are rougher and more dated feeling than the same game on better hardware. I don't think this is because developers are starting to ignore the earlier hardware. I think it's just a case of technology starting to progress past the point where a PS4's GPU or a GTX 760 can really deliver top-notch results. Still, both platforms do run the game just fine with some compromises. The Masher has a few small advantages over the PS4 and one big visual disadvantage. First, here are the settings I'll be referring to for the next couple minutes, which I'm calling medium. As far as advantages, some of it is what you'd expect. Tessellation is usually not a demanding effect on PC, so I have it on and it's noticeably better than the PS4. Ground cover is not only more complex on PC, but also appears to just be different. I noticed the same thing with the Masher Pro and Xbox One X. Supposedly Final Fantasy XV isn't just a port for PC, but has had a lot of care and extra work put in. Maybe the artist decided to offer better foliage options on PC, or maybe it was an artistic decision made after the console versions were finished. Either way, the PC looks a bit better. Also notice the graininess in the shadows on PS4. I believe it's a reduction in the resolution the shadow maps are being rendered at, and while it's never terrible, shadows on the PS4 are obviously lower quality. Lastly, the Masher does seem to have more reflections in some scenes, like when the boys are pushing the car during the game's intro, but it's not clear if that's true across the board or just in select situations. The big advantage the PS4 has over the Masher is in textures, which you've probably already noticed. The Masher's 2GB of VRAM is normally good enough for medium to high texture quality at 1080p, but I was getting a few stutters in this game and the VRAM buffer was almost full. I dropped to low and the stuttering stopped. That's unfortunate because I don't think the textures you see here are at all optimized for lower-end systems. There are plenty of big, beautiful games that the Masher has been able to play with much better texture quality and with lower VRAM usage, but it is what it is, and this is a trend that will start to become more common as average VRAM usage rises well above 2GB in games, and you're going to start seeing developers worry less about how well the game looks or performs on 2GB cards because there just won't be as many people using them. It's disappointing in a game with a 100GB download size, since you'd expect there'd be plenty of room to have optimized versions of textures for a range of hardware. Every texture isn't worse than the PS4, but key textures like character models and the base ground texture are lower, which is obviously noticeable. Still, can the Masher make up for that by running the game at 60 FPS? The Masher can't play Final Fantasy XV at 1080p and 60 FPS at any settings. The game is too demanding, so a reduction in resolution is necessary. There are two ways to get to 60 FPS without dropping the other visual settings. The first is by using the game's built-in resolution scaling options. Unfortunately, this uses preset tiers of res scaling at 50%, 75%, 100%, etc. That means that if 75% resolution scaling at 1080p is still a touch too demanding, which it is, you have to go all the way down to 50% resolution scaling, which is 540p. As you can see, it's very soft, and since the game's art style isn't really intended to be played like this looks worse than a PS3 Final Fantasy game, which would have been running at a more comparable resolution. The only real advantage is that the UI is rendered at native screen resolution, so if you're playing at native 720p, well, it's a better choice for overall graphical fidelity, but the UI is now softer than before. If it were me, I'd play at 720p in medium settings if I was shooting for 60 FPS. It's not ideal, but if you can't stand 30, the Masher will do 60. The Masher will also play the game at 1440p at low settings. This honestly surprised me given how demanding the game is for the Masher's GTX 760, but it can do it. You do lose some benefits of the medium preset, and the game is noticeably flatter and less finely decorated, but there's a nice bump to sharpness that helps compensate. If you're on a 1080p monitor, I don't think the super sampling benefit is worth the reduction in settings, but on a native 1440p monitor, go for it. In my opinion, this is a tie. The Masher is capable of 60 FPS, but at reduced settings to the point where I think most people will probably be fine with 30 FPS. It's also capable of 1440p, but just barely, and with an overall reduction in visuals. It's ahead of the PS4 in a number of noticeable areas, but loses out in textures, which in my opinion is one of the most important visual quality metrics I judge a game by. Both platforms do just fine and the game is perfectly enjoyable, but in what is likely not to be a surprise to anyone, the Masher Pro and Xbox One X deliver a much better experience. A big thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon. Check out the Potato Masher Pro and the Xbox One X playing Final Fantasy 15 in a couple of days. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video, and let's continue the conversation down in the comments. Have a great day.